everybody. Happy Tuesday for the few of you who are joining me so far. Wanted to pop on and talk about a few things. One of them is a lens that is new from Canon, and that is the 10-20 f4 RF IS-L. I think I got everything right because I think it is image stabilized as well as being an L series lens. It's 10-20 on full frame, and that is at least one of the things that I want to talk about with this lens is that it's a full frame lens. And I have obviously not had the lens or had an opportunity to play with it yet. I'm not on that list of getting Canon things right away. However, I do know a lot of people within the industry, and some of them have had it. I'm going to echo a few thoughts that I have found especially helpful in some of the other content that I've consumed about this lens. And first and foremost, okay, it must be said that it is odd, and it seems to be a current behavior of Canon to be introducing these somewhat exotic zoom lenses, right? And it started upon the creation of the RF system with the 28-70 f2. More recently, we've had the 100-300 2.8, and now we have a 10-20 f4, which I believe they say is the widest full frame zoom that has ever been created. I think that's from them, and I think that's probably true. Rectilinear, anyway, and so it is one that's corrected for barrel distortion. But, like I said, in consuming some of the other content about the 10-20 f4, I do agree with, now one thing that I heard my buddy Josh say is, you know, why is this a full frame lens? And I get that. He says, why is this not an APS-C lens? Because 10-20 is more of an APS-C type of focal range, right? Everybody knows, probably if you're watching this, you know that I shoot interiors. That's what I do. And what's interesting about lenses like this is when they're developed from the manufacturers, two things that they always say is landscape and architecture, right? Now, I don't know how much architecture you, my audience, has shot, but I've shot a ton of it. And 10 millimeters on a full frame is not a focal length that is particularly useful to architecture. You're going to have perspective distortion all over the place. Things are going to be stretching toward you and everything. Okay, so who is this lens for? And it goes back again to Canon saying that it is a full frame lens. So who I think this lens is for is, well, let me put it this way. The only way that I would want to use this lens, and I think it would be fantastic, it could be fantastic for this, is on a crop sensor body, right? Because that will give you effectively, depending on the crop, but it'll give you effectively like a 15 to 30-ish range, focal range. And that's really useful. That is a useful type of range for shooting architecture. Okay, the other thing that they say is landscape. I don't want to get too much into landscape because I don't, you know, specialize in landscape, but the same kind of thing is true. You know, you shoot a 10 millimeter lens at a landscape and you have it all the way open to 10 millimeter, you're going to get nothing but foreground, and mountains that you have in the background just going to look like little speed bumps, right? So it being a full frame lens is kind of, you know, along the lines of what Canon has been doing with these exotic zooms, like the 28-70 f2, the 100-300 2.8. You know, with those two lenses, I can see kind of more utilitarian usefulness. A 28-70 f2, I know wedding photographers who love that lens because it effectively takes two or three focal lengths, and it's like a collection of primes, right? When a lens gets as fast as f2. 100-300 2.8, that would be a fantastic indoor sports lens, like a basketball lens, let's say. You know, that's great for that on full frame, right? But 10-20 on full frame, I don't know anybody, and I've been shooting architecture for years and interiors and such, that would want to go that wide. And that's fine in itself. if you want it to be a creative type of a lens. But then it begs the question, it's a $2,000 plus lens. And if I want to be really creative, so the widest lens that I own right now, full frame, is a Laowa 12mm 0D. Why would I pick up a $2,000 10 to 20 to get that 2 extra millimeters and what, autofocus? You know, autofocus isn't really a thing when you're shooting that wide. You know, you can spitball it and it'll pretty much be in focus. So I don't understand who this lens is for, but to go back to what my buddy Josh said, you know, that this should be an APS-C lens. And if I were to use this 10 to 20 f4, I would probably use it on the Red Komodo X, right? Which is, depending on how you're shooting it, but at 6K, it's about a 1.4 times crop or so, which is very good for shooting interiors. It would be useful in that the lens is image stabilized because the Komodo X doesn't have any kind of inboard image stabilization. It's a great focal range on that camera. It's a great focal range on the C70, right? But, okay, we're talking about crop sensor cameras. And so for $2,000, why wouldn't this have been a crop sensor lens, right, which is what 10 to 20 is, and been even faster, a stop faster at 2.8 versus f4, if you're going to pay $2,000. And it probably still wouldn't even be that expensive if it's a crop lens with that, right? Or why wouldn't it be a crop lens but less expensive? So we'll do a 10 to 20 f4 for, you know, crop lens, but at, you know, $1,200 or $1,500 instead of $2,000 plus. So, you know, at first when it was announced, I was excited, like, man, that's great. You know, I mean, I could use this on Komodo and this and that, you know, and then I got to thinking about it more, and I heard people like Josh talking about it, and it's like, well, you know, that's true. Why is it a full frame? I mean, who's doing that? You know, I wouldn't. So, you know, let me know what you guys think about it. Is it a lens that I'm still interested in? Maybe only for the Komodo X, but here's the other thing I wanted to talk about with it, though. There's still a problem with the Komodo X, and I can only be informed by what other Canon lenses, other modern Canon lenses behave like. And by that, I mean this. I use, my daily driver is the 15 to 35 RF 2.8, which is a fantastic lens. When I had the OG Komodo, which has an RF mount, I picked up the 14 to 35 to get that 1 millimeter wider, right? Because a Komodo is a crop sensor. But what I found was the 14 to 35 f4 Canon RF lens, while it is sharp, it is not especially well corrected. It's not corrected for distortion as well as the 15 to 35 2.8 is. And you say, but wait, you know, it goes wider. It's, you know, of course it's not, because it's 14 instead of 15. No, well, if you punch it in a little bit and you put a 15 millimeter perspective on the 14 to 35, it's still going to be fishbowly. It's still going to bow compared to the 15 to 35, which is really well corrected. And so, you know, Canon's consideration when they design these things is design them not with red bodies in mind, right? They're designing them for their cameras that will have software, you know, firmware on board that has distortion corrections for these profiles. And that's how they can get, one of the ways that they can get these lenses to be so wide and yet so compact is they're not optically rectilinear, right? They're relying on the firmware and the software within the Canon bodies to make them rectilinear. And so if you're somebody like me who wants to put a very wide, new, rectilinear, right, Canon lens on a non-native body, like a red body, it's not going to work for you. You know, it's going to be bendy and stretchy and fishbowly and everything else. And so, you know, that brings up really, that brings up something interesting, and that is the onboard correction profiles within camera bodies, okay, have only really been a thing for a few years, which means, and once I got to thinking about this, it kind of made sense, which means the, let's say, Canon EF glass or some of the older Sony glass or Leica glass or, or whatever, right? The Canon EF mount glass is usually better corrected optically than the RF mount glass, because the RF mount glass is leveraging the distortion profiles that are now found within every single camera body to be able to make these lenses smaller and lighter physically, right? They don't need very aggressive grinds and big elements and such to be able to correct distortions within these very complicated optical formulas these days. They don't need to do that optically like they would. Oh, hey, my daughter's calling. Well, I'll call her back. They don't need to do that optically like they did with the EF glass, because with the EF glass, nothing had distortion corrections in it, right? So that's why I'm kind of wary about the 10 to 20, even if I were to use it like on the Komodo X to shoot interiors. It's because my recent experience with the next widest Canon lens, the 14 to 35, wasn't an especially good one. It was pretty warpy, and you can look back on my channel, look through my shorts. I made a short video about it when I had it on the Komodo, and I showed you could see the edge of the frame warping on the 14 to 35 where you couldn't on the 15 to 35. So I don't know who this lens is for. I might still be interested in it, if for no other reason to see if it is going to be useful as a crop sensor lens or if it's going to be too stretchy on a camera like the Komodo. I don't own any crop body Canons. I have a pair of R5Cs, which is what I'm shooting on now, and we'll get to that. We always go over that when I'm shooting on today. R5C is kind of interesting. Okay, so here's how a lens like this, how the 10 to 20 f4 may be useful on a camera like an R5C, right? R5C can do 8K 60 RAW, which you can then take into your NLE and interpret as C-Log2. So what does that do versus the baked in C-Log3? Because there's a lot of noise out there. People say, oh, it makes a difference. It doesn't make a difference, so on and so forth. Canon decides to put C-Log2 or not in bodies that they believe the sensor has the amount of dynamic range calculated in however many stops for middle gray to be able to handle a log curve like C-Log2. Now, this is completely different than, say, like Sony, which puts S-Log3 in everything and then just lets you figure it out, if it's going to be useful for you or not. Canon doesn't do that. Canon says, okay, this is a cinema profile, and so these cinema cameras that have this much amount of dynamic range, so they have decided that the R5C does not have the dynamic range on that sensor to be sufficient with the aggressive C-Log2 profile. However, okay, when we talk about dynamic range, I'm never interested in the dynamic range conversation on how many total stops of dynamic range exists on a sensor or not. Just not interested, okay? What I am more interested in is how the log curve behaves as it approaches the extremes of that scale. And so with C-Log2 versus C-Log3, the highlight roll-off in C-Log2 as it approaches that white point is a more kind of logarithmic, softer type of approach, coming in for a gentle landing, versus C-Log3, which in comparison is clippy. It looks clippy. It looks video-y, right? As it goes to that white point. Not so much with the shadows, but as it goes to that white point, right? So I still like using C-Log2 in cameras that the manufacturer won't put it in because they say that there's not enough dynamic range on it. I still like using it. Give me the ability to and let me decide. And so as this relates to the R5C and as it relates to the Canon 10 to 20 f4 lens that we're talking about here, the R5C is kind of quirky, right? So if you want to shoot 8K 60 and shooting the RAW is the only way you're going to be able to unlock that C-Log2 profile, which I want to do for the reason I just said. I like the highlight roll-off. if you shoot 8K 60 RAW, you have to give the camera USB power delivery camera through the USB-C port in order for it to unlock 8K 60, and also you also have lens operability, right? So the lens will autofocus and such. You have to have that power there. Okay, you can't do it even with the battery grip, right? Because it just doesn't. It does not. It's my understanding the R5C does not supply the voltage capable that makes that capable through the battery well. Okay, it has to be PD over the USB-C port. And so you have to rig a battery. You know, you got to rig a V-mount battery and be able to power it like that. But there's a hack to this, right? Now, the hack to this is R5C is an 8K camera, 8K sensor. If you punch in to Super 35, right, it's a true RAW. And so when you go lower in resolution, it's still a 1-to-1 pixel readout. And so it is going to crop in, window into the sensor. And so 6K RAW is Super 35 on the R5C. It just so happens that you can shoot 6K 60 RAW without supplying the camera external power. And so if you have the LPE6NH battery, the one battery that the camera takes from the factory, or you have a battery grip that has the two batteries, you can shoot 6K RAW punched into Super 35. Now, that is where this lens that we're talking about might shine. So now you would effectively have, with the 10-20 f4 lens, a 6K RAW R5C with an approximate 15-30 focal length, which is perfect for shooting real estate, you know, architecture, things like that, as a video camera we're talking about here. That could be the best use of this lens because it's also optically stabilized. It's also a first-party lens to Canon, and so there should be a firmware update at some point that enables, you know, the distortion profile to be on board within the Canon body. That could be the best use for this lens. You don't have to rig it further. You don't have to deal with 8K. 8K, especially the Canon 8K, is a bear to work with. I mean, it really is. So let's see who we got here. Michael. Good to see you, Michael. Yes, the EF glass could have been better corrected in glass for distortion, but they were then limited by having to do this. Now Canon can do wilder things and let the camera correct. Yeah, exactly. You know, but you know, for people like me though, right, where I'm putting the Canon RF glass on a red body, you know, that's not a design consideration that Canon, and I wouldn't expect them to, you know, that they took with that. And so it doesn't help me. You know, I actually do like some of the older EF glass for that same reason. You know, so for instance, I had the EF Cine Primes for a while. Ended up selling them, but I had them for a couple of years, few years, and I was shooting red at that time too. It was the DSMC2, the Dragon X body. Which has an even bigger sensor than the Komodos do, physically bigger. It's like a 1.2 crop or something like that. And the thing that I remember is, okay, I had the Laowa 12mm zero distortion at that time too. I had a couple different copies of it. And I also had the Canon 14mm Cine Prime. Now, even though the Canon 14mm EF Cine Prime does not, I mean, it says it's rectilinear, but it's not as aggressive with the marketing hype like the Laowa 0D lens is. But it is really, really well corrected. I mean, you can barely see any barrel distortion in that lens. Is the Canon EF 14mm DSLR lens, the stills lens, the same? I don't know because I haven't had it, nor have I had the Sigma variant of that. I think there's a Sigma. There's a couple different Sigmas. They've got a couple zooms that go through 14, and I think they might have a 14 prime as well. I don't know, but you know, what you're saying is absolutely true. You know, it's because it allows them to do the wilder things. It allows them really, you know, beyond the wilder things, it allows them to just make lenses more compact. I think is the biggest reason that they do it. You know, and Sony does the same thing. If you were to take a look at the Sony, the more current G Master lenses, they're tiny. You know, they're tiny compared to what a DSLR lens of that optical formula would have been just a few years ago. And how are they doing that? Well, I don't think there's as good a lenses in some regards, and those are the ones that take, you know, the space to do things right. Like for instance, I don't know, Michael, if you saw Gerald Undone's recent review on a RE Cinema Prime, and this is a $35,000 lens. It's giant, you know, it's a 35 millimeter lens. And one of the things that he said, which is interesting and kind of goes to this same line of thinking, is it's so big so they can grind the glass and make these concave and convex shapes in these lens groups less aggressive, right? And so optically it's going to be better when you have these lesser aggressive types of shapes to correct for the distortions and stuff if you make the thing physically bigger. You know, because if you make it tiny, okay, now you got to have these really, you know, parabolic shapes and stuff, and it's not only a lot more difficult, but it doesn't end up with as nice of a lens. And I think the same thing is kind of happening with the conversation that we're in here, you know, is they're making the stills lenses really, really small, and they're relying on the software to correct it. With something like an RE lens, they can't rely on any software because all the cameras they're putting those lenses on don't have any, you know, correction software in them. So, you know, so they have to make it like that. Gives lens designer more freedom to be innovative. Absolutely, bud. I mean, the 28 to 70 f2, I call it the Chodester because it's chody. You know, it's like as long as it is wide. Anyway, you know, but I call it the Chodester. So the 28 to 70 f2, I've had that lens. I didn't use it much. I used it for basically this, you know, for the talking head kind of thing. And the reason I didn't use it much is because, well, for video, it breathes like a mother. You know, I mean, it changes focal lengths when it racks focus, right? It is a beautiful lens optically. I mean, it is so good. You know, it's so sharp at 28, it's so sharp at 70 and everything in between, you know, but it is so big and heavy. I mean, it is bigger and heavier than a lot of cine lenses. It really is. It's giant. You know, you don't know until you try to use it, right? How big and heavy. It's a big and heavy lens. It is not optically stabilized. Now, that's one of the things that I really like with a lot of the Canon RF lenses is they have stabilization on board the lens. And so especially for video shooters, I enjoy shooting the R5C because it doesn't have IBIS in it, especially since what I'm shooting typically, I'm shooting very wide. And we all know about the Canon wide angle wobble thing with their IBIS. They just haven't figured out how to do it really all that well. I'm told by people who like to shoot Canon for wildlife and things like that, that the IBIS is actually better for that use case than say like the Sony IBIS is. But for shooting wide, the Canon IBIS is junk. And so I enjoy shooting the R5C because it has a pinned sensor in it. It doesn't move. And the Red Komodo X that I'm also shooting has a pinned sensor. It doesn't move. And so having lenses have onboard stabilization is really handy, you know. So that's one of the reasons I ended up selling I ended up trading it for other stuff, but I ended up getting rid of the 28 to 70 f2 is it breathes like a mother. It is really, really big and heavy. And even though it is optically insane, and it's a great lens, and I understand why wedding photographers like that lens to replace a couple different ones that they would have otherwise, it isn't stabilized either. So, you know, I would rather have, say, like the 2470 2.8 that has the IBIS in it, and it's a smaller, lighter lens. So, you know, but yeah, no, I agree. You know, they're doing more aggressive things there. Mike Laidman, how you doing? I wonder, once you're stopped down a bit, how the 10 to 22 would compare with the APS-C super wides. I have the 10 to 18 for super wide emergencies on super wide emergencies on the C200. I had a pair of C200s pretty recently. I ended up donating them to my church, and I wasn't using them a whole lot either. I never had the 10 to 18. That's the gold ring one, right? So it's one of the lesser series. It's not an L. It's the I'd looked at it before, never got it. The Laowa 0D is really a good lens as long as you're okay pulling your own focus. And the reason that I've kept it as long as I have was kind of for the emergencies that you're talking about. Because, you know, really a lens really that wide is, it's funny that you say that. I'm gonna figure out how to use that now. So, because it's true. So a lens that wide really is only for emergencies, because, you know, it's the same thing with, like, you know, if you shoot real estate, I have a 70 to 200 that I carry with me all the time. Why? Just in case I need it for an emergency, right? Just in case, like, there's a mountain that the agent says, oh, I wish that mountain looked like it was bigger from this window. It's like, well, you know, I mean, I have something that'll help you with there, you know, with that. So, you know, so that's the only reason a lens that wide would exist for me, is for emergencies, you know, if that's what you meant by that. Once you stop down the 10 to 22, I don't know what stopping down would have to do with that comparison, though. I mean, are you talking about like a sharpness kind of thing? I mean, is the 10 to 18 like not wide, or not sharp, wide open? And I don't think it's that fast either. Is it a 2.8? Maybe that's what you're talking about. Maybe the 10 to 18 is a 2.8. And so if you stop that one down, you know, but here's the thing too, like, you know, when you're talking about f-stops, this is just an arbitrary number. Like, you know, it isn't really like a t-stop where it's light transmission. And so, you know, it's not out of the question to have a lens that's branded as f4 and a lens that's branded at 2.8 to be almost as bright as each other, you know, wide open, just depending, you know, if you're in that same S35 crop scenario. Oh yeah. So if I were to put the crop 10 to 18 on the R5C with the Super 35 crop, I don't know. I mean, I could try, but I probably won't. You know, I mean, here's the thing about that too. Like, I like shooting the Komodo X, even for real estate. And it's funny, on my last video, I just posted one a couple days ago, real estate video that I shot with Komodo X, and somebody asked me, I have a Sony A7S III, would this look different? It was kind of a strange way that he worded the question. You know, he says, would this look different with the Sony A7S III? You know, and I said, well, yeah, I mean, it'll look different. You know, my background with the A7, I have a background with the A7S III. I've shot probably 50 properties on the A7S III, primarily with the 18 millimeter Zeiss Batis for my main wide lens. You know, so I'm very familiar with that platform. And I said, yeah, I mean, it'll look different. The A7S III will with the Komodo X. If you already have an A7S III, I mean, this is like comparing apples and bazookas, right? It's not the same thing at all. And I say, you know, here's the thing is, so I use the Komodo X for a couple different reasons that are not relevant. Okay. I use the Komodo X because I have one, because I could afford it. And so I bought one. And I enjoy using it. That's the only real reason, you know, that I use the Komodo X for real estate. The A7S III, I told him, is a more appropriate camera for shooting real estate. It's smaller, it's lighter, it's way cheaper. It has tracking autofocus, you know, that you can rely on. It doesn't spit out giant files like R3D files, you know. And okay, so what does it give up? So yeah, it gives up. I mean, you know, I think most people would say that they enjoy the red Komodo X image over the Sony A7S III image. But you know, what's that worth to you? Because it's going to cost you a pile, you know, not just in money because it's an extraordinarily more expensive camera, but in time, you know, it's a slower working camera. In workflow as it relates to like storage space and, you know, and things like that. So, you know, will you get a better image out of it? Yeah, you'll get a better image out of it, but you have to work for it and you have to pay for it. You know, so it's not really like an apples to apples comparison. You know, 4.5 to 5.6. Oh, the 10 to 18. 4.5. I mean, I guess the 10 to 20 is an f4, so we're probably looking like pretty similar as far as brightness goes. So what does Sigma have? Sigma has like 12 to 24. I think they have. I think it's an f4 though too. Yeah, they've got a 12 to 24. It's an f4, and they have a 14 to 28 or something like that, and it's a 2.8. But I think the 2.8 is a 14, and I think they have a 14 millimeter prime also. But on crop sensor, so like when I'm shooting real estate video, I enjoy being at or around 18 millimeter full frame equivalent perspective, which on crop bodies is around 12 millimeter, and that's why I enjoy using the 12 millimeter 0D Laowa with the Komodo X. Komodo X is like, it's a strange size sensor, right? Like the Komodo and the Komodo X, they're bigger than Super 35. They're not as big as full frame. They're kind of in the middle. Closer to Super 35 than full frame. When I had the Dragon X, it was closer to full frame than Super 35. But it's kind of a strange in between, you know, type of crop factor. So I think it's 1.33 full readout if you're shooting 16:9. So it'll window in on the top and the bottom. It becomes like 1.4 or something like that. But what's interesting about that is you're going to get different looks out of your lenses and different. You're going to be able to shoot 6K RAW, 16-bit with just amazing, you know, color potential there. And it really is. It's like a color explosion. You know, if what you're used to using is 8-bit and 10-bit and even, you know, 12-bit, I mean, shooting red RAW is like, the codec is insane. You know, and it's just, like I said, it's just a color explosion. It's awesome to work with. And it's nearly impossible to break. But it gives you, because that sensor is kind of a strange size, it gives you some different creative options, you know, and like as you get to work with that system and as you learn what your lenses behave like on that body and everything, you realize it's like, you know, this is really a unique system in so many ways. And one of the ways that that's a unique system, and really maybe the way that not a lot of people talk about, because it does take some experience with it to really start to see and realize this, is that your lenses that you already know look a little bit different. And it's not for the better or for the worse, but it's for the different, you know? And so being a creative, you can leverage that difference into, you know, into doing different things with it. And that's really neat about that system, you know, is it gives all of your lenses that you already know kind of a new lease on life, you know, and they look a little bit different just because the crop's kind of weird. You know, it's kind of a weird crop and it's still high resolution. It's still 6K resolution. Tiny with IS cheap. I mean, I'd imagine it's not as sharp as a 10 to 20 wide open. If you're going to go that route, then it's nice to have a few bucks, save a few bucks. Yeah, no, I absolutely agree. But like we said, though, I mean, you know, perhaps that tiny cheap one, it is the one I'm thinking about. It's the gold ring one. It might be optically better corrected, you know, for the same reasons that we're talking about. It's from the day where they had to be, right? Whereas the 10 to 20, I mean, I don't know. Like, I don't know how I can test this without buying one. You know, because they're new. It's like, you know, it's unlikely you're going to be able to rent it from anywhere. And I don't like renting things anyway. You know, that's just kind of throwing away money because I got to send it back. But maybe I'll buy one, and I mean, because it could be useful on the, like we were talking about, the R5C, the Super 35 scenario, or on the Komodo X. Will it be all bowed? It's pretty small, I mean, I've seen enough about it to know that it's a tiny little bugger. Let's see. Hey, real estate. How you doing, man? 14 to 24 Sigma. Yeah. 14 to 24. Yeah. That's so I didn't go over, but I'm going to go over real quick, and then I'll get back to the questions. So what I'm shooting on today is the Canon R5C. I have the 50 millimeter 1.2 RF, which I hate, by the way. I don't know if you've ever had that conversation. I've had that conversation with Josh, and I think with Carlos too, about why I hate the 50 millimeter 1.2 RF. I like the EF version better. And it doesn't have to do with like the distortion and everything that we're talking about here, because they're 50s and they're both well corrected anyway. It's sharper than the EF, but it does not work as well. It's a lot bigger and heavier. Autofocus on video, whether it be on Red or it be on Canon, it sucks. It's slow. It's noisy. It is not entirely accurate with AF. And here's the thing, like I thought it was just my copy of it at first, I'm like, well, I mean, this thing's kind of, it's weird on me, and so I should get it serviced or whatever. But then I started kind of looking into it. Maybe I search out and see if other people have this problem. And it turned out that a lot of other people had these same problems with, I think it's just this lens. It's one of the earliest RF design lenses, the 51.2. But I mean, it's really good for this, because it is really sharp. And when you're streaming, like I am now, there's a lot of things working against you with sharpness. My internet connection's working against me. The software that I'm running it through is working against me. YouTube's mangling it. And so you end up with this really soft, squishy image anyway, even if you're capturing it at high resolution when you're streaming. So anyway, I have the R5C, Canon 50 millimeter RF 1.2, my AEA KU5A, going into a Rodecaster Pro 2. I have my key and my fill here are the Amaran 2x2 mats, RGB mats, which have the world's noisiest supply boxes. So I have off camera here that you can't see. I should do a review on these things because these boxes are obnoxious. I have the boxes kind of sandwiched in. I have like a sound blanket hanging over a bar, and then have the control boxes inside there, so they still get the airflow, but you can't have the noise, coming and messing with you. Yeah, and that's what I'm using, and I'm using the face only autofocus mode on the R5C, which is pretty reliable. You tell me. I mean, can you see the edges of these? Because here's the other thing about the 51.2 is it breathes like a mother too. Like, I mean, if I were to focus on the back wall and then back on my face, it will change focal length, when it does that. So, so can you see it pumping? Maybe you can if, oh yeah, see, I can even see it on my monitor. If I do this and it tracks with my face, you see it stretching on the edge there. I mean, it is not very well corrected at all. Not for that anyway. So another thing that Mike was saying, with the focus breathing compensation technology and stuff, a lot of these lenses are made to be used with that technology nowadays. So it's not for the better or worse. It's for the different. That's pretty good. Well, I mean, it is, and it's like, I don't know. I mean, well, it kind of goes with like what I was telling the guy with the A7 III and the Komodo. Why do you shoot the Komodo X? Well, because I like it. Because I could afford it. And I bought it. And now if you do it's very expensive. So if you do buy it, you want to be able to use it on something. If I can shoot what I otherwise could have just taken the R5C and do anyway. I can have it earn its keep a little bit, it's even though it's in little dribs and drabs compared to what, the total price of the platform was, because I enjoy it, and that's one of the things, it's not better or worse, it's different. So, Yeah, so that's what I had to talk about today. I am probably gonna call the stream here pretty soon. Thank you guys for hanging out with me. Yeah, you can check out on my channel. Hey, like the video too. It helps me out. I don't know if it really does help me out or not, but if you like this stream and such, let me know always if you're. I have a lot of people I know that watch these streams afterwards. They're not able to catch them live, and so let me know what you think about the 10 to 20 f4 down in the comments there. I think my next streaming topic is probably going to be about the Sony cameras and particularly about the FX3 and what seems to be a very hot topic of late because there was that movie, The Creator, that was filmed with the A7S III. And so now there's no shortage of YouTubers saying, look, it's good enough to do this. And there is equally no shortage of real cinema guys saying, no, you guys are full of it because of this. And so that's maybe an interesting topic to dive into that we should have a discussion about. Michael, I think the RF51.2 needs a version 2 for the points you mentioned, but RF35 1.2, we can't go a whole stream, right, without mentioning the 35 or the 24 that don't exist. But you know what, Michael, and that's one of the things too, man. It's like, Canon has given us all these exotic zoom designs, with the whatever this is, the 10 to 20 and the 100 to 300, 2.8 and all that. And it's like, man, we're over here like, come on, man. It's like all I want is a 35. All right, had to get that in. So I will make that the last comment. We will end on the harping on the 35 1.2 because I'm with you. I would buy it. All right, guys, I'll see you.